Good afternoon. This is Irena Sondine with Siemens Digital Industry Software. I want to thank everybody on the line for attending our webinar today, which will be presented by our Siemens channel partner, Corbinsoft, and the webinar, as you can see, is on Crack SAFe and getting on the Agile release train. So, can we go to the next slide, please? And I'd like to just start by going over a few housekeeping items. The webinar will be recorded and made available at Corbinsoft.com. If you do have any questions, please use the Q&A panel for the questions throughout the presentation, and we will have one of our team members answer, or David, who will be presenting today, will answer at the end of the webinar for the dedicated Q&A session time. And if you do have any client issues regarding the webinar, like you can't see the screen or you can't hear, please also address those in the chat, and one of our team members will help you out. Okay? So our agenda today, we're going to talk about SAFe for about 5 minutes for those who may not be familiar with a Scaled Agile Framework. And then we will go into a discussion and overview of the SAFe components. And then we'll have a really nice story to tell you about Siemens LCS, which stands for Lifecycle Collaboration Software, and SAFe, and the implementation of SAFe within that product development group within Siemens, in conjunction with a product that is a Siemens product called Polarion. And David from Corbinsoft will be doing the demonstration scenarios of SAFe and Agile and Polarion, and then we'll have 10 minutes of dedicated Q&A. Next slide, please. So before we get started, I just want to highlight a little bit of information for you about Siemens. Siemens is a very large conglomerate, as some of you I'm sure know. We have about 9 different vertical industries that within the Siemens, the greater Siemens, if you will. And we are part of, and I am, and David Merrill from Corbinsoft work with the division that is called Digital Industry Software Group. We have about 12,000 employees within that particular division. Siemens overall has a very diverse customer base, and what you're seeing here on this particular slide is our Polarion product customers, which is also very diverse. And having such a diverse, I love to say this to customers, because having such a diverse customer base has a lot of benefits for our customers. And it also has a lot of benefits for us individually who work with those customers. We get to have a lot of fun learning about new industries and how they work. But more importantly, as Siemens and partners like Corbinsoft, who's presenting today, and our field engineering teams and our support teams, as they engage with our customers, it frequently leads to different approaches. And that different approach may benefit another customer from a different industry, without divulging, of course, any confidential information. But more importantly, that feedback that we get from our customer base goes back to our product management teams, and it really does stimulate their thinking as they continue to enrich the product, the design, the feature, as our customers' needs change. And that's one thing we all can depend on, that things are going to change. So if you have any questions about any of our customers, you can send me also an email, and that will be at the end of the webinar, or David Merrill. He's quite familiar with a lot of these customers too, and we're happy to answer them. So a little bit about Siemens and SAFe. Siemens Digital Industries is a SAFe platform partner, and many of our product development teams within Siemens actually use Polarion the Polarion product to develop all of our software products. Today, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to touch on a use case with Siemens LCS product group and the success that they've had with Agile, SAFe, and the Polarion product. And as a side note, I just want to point out that the use in this group of Polarion and Agile and SAFe was prior, because this has been brought to my attention by a customer one time is saying to me, well, Siemens owns Polarion, right? But they actually purchased Polarion prior to the acquisition that Siemens did of the Polarion product in 2016. So they were already using the Polarion product in conjunction with SAFe and Agile methodologies. So I just also want to mention that this partnership with SAFe, it really does complement the Polarion product, and it helps our customers achieve this kind of agility at a larger enterprise scale and increase the velocity as they develop their own products. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to David Merrill at this time, and we went over a little bit of the agenda, and here's a little more depth on the agenda, but I will let David Merrill from Corbinsoft speak to that.
Thank you very much, Irena. It really is a privilege for me to be able to present with Irena and Siemens in general. It really builds a partnership, not just of Corbinsoft's business to Siemens, but really in the act of pragmatically bringing these solutions to the customers that we just saw before. And I could probably stop the entire webinar now and just talk about customer stories, because that is what makes it fun for me personally, and it's what really drives Corbinsoft as an organization to implement and be successful with customers. So it's important for me always to bring these two concepts together. The idea of the SAFe thought of bringing agile practices into the enterprise. And you can see here that we've seen through Gartner Group, as we'll talk about a little bit later, some increases in productivity, significant improvements in quality, and perhaps not most important, but very important, especially in the world of software development, being able to go faster to market with these. And that often becomes a performance advantage. So in the webinar today, I'm really going to try to show, not just talk about the fundamentals, but see how those fundamentals get practiced, both in Polarion and in our customers' eyes and our customers' implementations. So I'd like to talk a little bit about an introduction. First, a little bit about who I am and why am I here. For those of you who don't know me, prior to the acquisition of Polarion by Siemens, I was 8 years the field services director. So I managed pre-sales and post-sales implementations with our customers. And for 3 years, I, with my business partners, have founded Corbinsoft. And we continue that work agnostic of Siemens, but working in close coordination with them. Some of my work history is exactly that. I focus on practical solutions, not just the thought of SAFe, but how SAFe can actually be implemented. And so at Corbinsoft, we really want to try to make your product better before you build it, before you release it. And in some ways, it services a concept called a digital twin, which I'll talk about a little bit later, where we produce the product virtually almost in thought before it becomes a reality, both in software or in physical product. And so for 10 years, I've been involved in these implementations. And my grandfather was a farmer. And as I grew up with him, he would always remind me to look at somebody's boots. And so that third point is just look at my boots. The reason why I mention that is because my boots have scuffs and mud and show the wear and tear of actually doing this at customers. And that's what I wanted to make sure you understood where I'm coming from. It's not just talking about it, but we do it every single day. And that's why I respect so much that Siemens also practices their their own product development using Polarion and SAFe, because we at Corbinsoft use Polarion every day for our own operations and our own software development. And it all began many years ago with the idea of a software Agile Manifesto, as certain practitioners came together and said, we want to be able to value, the individual interaction over a formal process or specific tools. It's better to have working software than pages and pages of documentation that we're too afraid to change. We want to be able to value customer collaboration over any kind of formality of requirements management or contract negotiation. And most especially, we want to respond to change. And it gave birth to Agile being a change-based architecture instead of following a rigorous plan that might have corresponded to earlier V model or waterfall methods, where high-level details were set in stone before a developer ever got a hold of it. And what happened was, Agile was enormously successful in software development, almost to the point where it then began to get notice of the business. And some teams that don't even develop software started to function as Agile teams to organize their work and their work product. And so really the upper levels of business took notice of this success and wanted to take advantage of that. And in some ways it sort of existed as a separation for team-based activity, practicing Agile in its many forms, and the business or product line focus that looked after budgets and roadmaps and public and marketing planning. And sometimes these two ideas didn't quite mesh well. And that gave birth, in my opinion, to the Scaled Agile Framework, where Agile needed to be expanded conceptually to embrace some of the needs of the more business-driven stakeholders. And this slide actually comes from the LCS group, and they bring together these same industry concepts of why SAFe is effective. We obviously want to have business results from the software development, and so you can see it really should yield us some very substantial benefits, but we really start looking at the business. So if you're new to SAFe, it is an implementation of what's often called an Agile Enterprise Framework. And it is reported to be the most successful or the most widely adopted. Within SAFe, there's actually 4 different modes or partitions. We're looking at an image here of the full SAFe model, where it's comprehensively implemented across all aspects of the business. And as you can imagine, it is very complicated to realize portfolio development, solution and program planning, and team identification and team execution, all up and down the continuum of activity from the very beginning of ideation all the way through to the low-level aspects of developing code and reviewing code and testing products to release to the marketplace. And what has happened is key enterprises have seen that they've been able to be successful here. So this slide talks about some of these key findings since 2015, when Gartner really started pursuing, examining, and interviewing about enterprise Agile frameworks. They've seen an increase year over year of dramatically popular and improving SAFe implementations. And what I'd really like to do is focus on these last two. I'm sorry. The 2 things that we wanted to see here is that the success of actually using Agile right now was not really a significant contribution to the success of an Agile framework. So you could really start practicing both Agile and an Agile enterprise framework coincidentally with one another. But what we do see out of this from the Gartner group are some clear recommendations. So one is to take these really complex development challenges that are very high-end solutions like ERP, or for Siemens, the LCS family of products, and implement an entire framework around them. It is much more than just a single product, but really ties into a product line. And they want to be able to maximize and scale this across the entire organization. But in here, we have two very significant recommendations, and that is we want to invest the time to get Scrum teams going and working with Agile to contribute to the overall success of SAFe. And we want to be able to key into some of the best practices of extreme programming, of lean programming, to bring the activities of the team and the focus of those up to the rest of the organization. And this starts to build for me a practical view of how we can begin with realizing SAFe now by making sure that we can start with some of the best practices. Now, as I've gone and worked with different customers over time, I walk in and out of their halls and I often see Agile boards that look like this. And not only just one board, but I've actually seen entire hallways lined with interconnected strings and Post-it notes. And every turn of the office seems to have a different board that shows program work and Scrum and Agile teams. And often I think about that because I thought, well, what would happen if the sprinkler system went on or if there was a fire? And also the concept that in order to appreciate and make changes and understand that board, I have to actually be in the building. But in a lot of the customers that we and I work with, there's no more the notion that everybody's in the same building or the same office. They are a global enterprise. And as a result, they can't see and change this board anymore. And even to the point where, if somebody came in and did a well-meaning change or perhaps even a malicious change, how do we know who did this change and what the impact of that change was and why was it made? These are all challenges that Polarion SAFe specifically addresses. In fact, this last bullet point are some questions you'll never have to ask again if you use Polarion. You will never have to wonder what changed, when did it change, and who did that change. This is all information that will be transparently captured through the collaboration of Polarion. So the answer to Polarion is consistent with a Siemens directive to build digital twins, a twin copy in data that represents the real work of product development and product release. And so Polarion and collaboration within Polarion, it really does enable organizations to start now, to have the team-based agile facilitation, but then grow into the demands and the drive of the high-level business needs, yet still establishing a single source of truth, not Post-its in 5 offices or 50 offices or 100 offices, but rather one place where all of the contributing activity of the teams filter in and contribute to the dashboards and the synthetic decisions of the business level. With that, I'm going to transition into the specific discussion about the LCS experience. Now, I don't personally work with the LCS team, and I'm using basically their concepts, which they presented openly earlier this year. And it was really their internal adoption, as Irena mentioned, in the early 2014, 2015 timeframes of identifying that SAFe was a roadmap that they intended to go to. And as you can see, they've identified that in addition to expanding beyond the teams, they had to do significant training at all levels of the organization associated with product release so that we can really understand some common terms like what is an agile release train, what is a program increment, and how these high-level business users can now pass along directives to program teams, and how program teams can now organize many development teams in actually getting the work done. And then once that work is done, how do we know when it's okay to release with quality? And so this kind of training becomes integral to the implementation of SAFe. And what Siemens found is that they used Polarion to really push the vehicle of implementing their SAFe practice. So you can see they went live with Polarion in November 2017. That, of course, was a product of their own use and development of their configuration in Polarion. And they used 12 Agile release trains, and they launched that in May of 2018. And over 850 people were involved in that from the beginning and end of their product cycles. And we'll see later on some of their metrics, but they are ramping up for clear extension beyond a simpler SAFe mode like Essential SAFe, which is that first mode we looked at, to really full SAFe implementation as well. So one of the true benefits in alignment happens here. We see on the right-hand side that the information of one team working on one Scrum iteration and building and implementing those user stories contributes to the planning and the delivery of a particular feature that's involved in an Agile release train. And all that work feeds into and goes up into the roadmap and ultimately into the entire portfolio, where high-level epics and other types of features and definitions are realized based on that particular business need. And we have traceability or connection between all of the artifacts from the very beginning of this to the end. And we'll see some of that today in Polarion. This is really quite a compelling story when you look at the metrics of the number of people who are involved in the LCS SAFe method and who use Polarion on a day-to-day basis. You can see that there are between 700 and 800 concurrent users every day, and they have more than 2,700 active users. Now, some of those people might be occasional users that are more involved in reviewing and approving or addressing the status quo of dashboard information, maybe not necessarily writing user stories and implementing code, but those people who are actively involved is quite significant in their organization. You can imagine 800 people in a meeting at any given time or looking at those Post-it notes. We want to make sure that all the active changes of those people can collaborate seamlessly with everybody else. Their cadence is that they've had 5 program increments so far, and they have 7 iterations or 7 scrums per program increment. And each of those iterations might be something that each team is involved in. So they've been able to do a significant number of releases. And as you can see, they're producing user stories at a very rapid rate, which feeds into the idea of the Agile Manifesto, where the teams have the organizing ability to innovate and define how they get something done, even where they might be feeding or understanding the directive of what gets done from some of the higher level features or portfolio epics. Now, finally, it becomes very important in the experience to understand how this information gets finished. So defining what it means to be done. And that might mean moving from test-driven development to making sure that the user stories that are worked on in a given Agile sprint combine to sufficiently test and give quality verification to some of the user stories and higher level epics. That features are complete and those features are ensured are additionally tested. That application lifecycle management functions feed into the DevOps tooling, where now the speed at which you can move from a test build to pushing into production and production utilization increases at a very rapid pace. All of them moving into a more comprehensive management and control of roadmaps. And they've even been able to make sure that release notes become more automated, reducing the number of times or the amount of time it takes to get something into production. So their key takeaways was Polarion allowed them to use Agile, but to scale it upward. And they definitely focused on this idea that there's a single master of truth, a single source of truth where all this information comes into and where queries can be maintained. that ask questions, not just of what are we doing now, what we have to do in the future, but even how we're maintaining a product that's in the field at the moment. And actually, both Irena and I made reference to this fourth point, which is when you increase usability and you improve the performance of teams to deliver, it is a lot of fun. It builds fun for the people involved. They no longer have to worry about the stupid stuff, about organizing Post-it notes and crossing out lines in paper, but rather they can focus on the innovation and the things that get them up every day and get them motivated to build better solutions. And most importantly, start the SAFe journey. It's a complex scenario, but with Polarion, you can begin fundamentally. And that leads us to, we're gonna get to some real Polarion action in just a minute, but now I wanted to sort of build for you how the Polarion tool provides fundamentals that feed into this kind of activity. And for me, personally, in my years of working with Polarion and Corbinsoft customers, there are many customers implementing SAFe concepts that don't even call it that don't recognize SAFe as a method that they follow, but they have intrinsically built their own process together that builds some of the functionality and the benefit of Agile together with some of the more formal product line planning and development practices that they have already established. They don't have to recreate the wheel and call it SAFe. They can bring Polarion together to start this collaboration today. So what we want to do with Polarion is connect the high-level portfolio and the projects with the teams so that not just software development, but all of the activities around releasing products and making sure that sponsorship is validated and that all the stakeholders at the entire continuum of access have been satisfied with their ability to contribute and their need to get information out to make key decisions. That is really what Polarion is all about. And it has some specific differentiation that helps this process. And so for if you've looked at other tools that work with Agile, I'll tell you that Polarion LiveDocs is a differentiator. It sets Polarion apart from just about any other tool or concept because it lets the more complex data-driven attributes be organized in simple-to-read documents where you can easily contextualize the features that are being planned into a release. And those people who need to review at a high level and give approval to actions can see that in a very easy to understand way and consume the same type of documents that they might be using today. But what they end up looking at is something quite different than a Word document or a Google document. It is a much more vibrant context, which we'll see. And so deep inside of Polarion, this collaboration tool that makes all of this happen, we have three fundamental pillars. One is being able to use requirements management to really organize epics and high-level functional and non-functional requirements, those things which are still really important to work with, but then allow us to collaborate with word round trip, with other detailed structures where we can really start to limit the amount of duplication and reuse the information from product release to product release. The second pillar is QA, which is essentially test management and execution, to be able to have end-to-end traceability that starts at the very beginning and goes all the way down, not just to the test case itself, but to test results and how, when, and where that test was executed. And so it all comes together with sort of the full application lifecycle management tool, which is what we're going to be seeing today. All of these capabilities of issue and defect management, of change management, of building and releasing, all in one structure so that SAFe can really be implemented. And a perfect example of that might be to take the Polarion documents and use that to form, as the LCS team mentioned, the release notes and the release information associated to an Agile release train. So the Agile release train can really take a document representation so that everybody can really understand what's going into each of those release train foundations. We can look at the document, read it, we can edit in the document, we can export it to external stakeholders who maybe don't have access to Polarion, and ultimately we can use that document structure for final review and approval. So with that, I'm gonna pause a moment in these conceptual discussions and really shift to a live demonstration of Polarion, and it's going to be focused on the SAFe project structure and how we get on that Agile release train. Because of the time involved, I won't go into a lot of very detailed feature and function operation in Polarion, but rather a survey over some of these contexts that we've just talked about. So we will see in this next scenario an explanation, a discussion of a portfolio. And we'll see how a portfolio stream is modeled into Polarion. And then we'll also see how that portfolio links down and connects to programs. And these programs we'll see the increments that actually cause the development work to get accomplished. So with that, I'm gonna bring in my my web interface, and it's probably a good segue to talk about Polarion as an exclusive web tool. It can have a very simple server implementation of a single server easily installed within your network or hosted in a cloud orientation. But it also can grow into a highly available enterprise cluster where the type of user growth that we might have seen in the LCS team with hundreds or thousands of concurrently connected users are well met by the single tool. Everything is accessed through a web interface. There is an SDK, a REST SDK, which is available, but I've logged into my Polarion server, and as you can see, I'm viewing a portfolio project. So on the left, I have a navigation pane, and on the right, I have a workspace that will change. And it's designed to draw the stakeholder into that area where they need to see sooner rather than later. If I was interested in the backlog, or I wanted to look at the development status, I could dive right into that view. But maybe I'd like to have more of a survey approach to the portfolio. So I'm going to open up the portfolio dashboard where I start to visualize what the release trains look like. They're implemented as epics in Polarion, and so we can see defined epics and their status. Is it in review? Is it under analysis? Has it been accepted? Is it in progress or finished? And this allows us to plan the work that's going to be sponsored and then also measure it as it's worked on at a very high level until it's finished. So there's capability within the tool, if turned on, to allow for procedural changes and dragging from one area to the next. But really, this becomes a reporting dashboard to show us how the epics are being worked on and the capabilities that are inside the process that are being realized within the epics. And we can view the actual progress of the underlying work of each of these as it moves through a completion of story points. So with that, maybe it would be reasonable for me to open up one of these particular items. Let's pick this one here, ALM 206, fill gaps in the support of product line engineering and variance management. Or actually maybe, yeah, this will be fine. So I'll click on that item and open the Polarion work item. This is the database record that visualizes this high-level release train. And underneath it, you can see that I have roll-up data of story points of both initially estimated story points and the number of story points which are currently in progress of being worked on. And these are the real user stories with the real development and Scrum Master estimates, all feeding up from the teamwork into this particular profile epic. And I can take action on this. I could build comments, and I can route this item for additional review and get more detailed analysis right from here. But also on the left-hand side, I might choose to go a little bit differently and take a look at some of that business documentation. So if I were to put on, say, a business hat now, then I might want to be able to see the embodiment of that particular portfolio epic in a document. And so I can open up and see that same plan, that same epic visualized as a Polarion document. And this Polarion document reads very much like a Microsoft Word document. So I can move through it and see the included information. I can start writing text about, this is how we will judge success right into the format. So it's very much like you would expect to be editing a Word document, but it's much different than that because we're really looking at data coming from all of these sources, and it's a multi-user document. Many people can be in here simultaneously, both adding text and also potentially including things like the same kind of capabilities. We want to have a critical and maybe within this, I would also like to make sure that I'm detailing some very important non-functional requirements, must perform. As I type the information that you see here and save it, I'm not just saving text, but rather creating the same kind of work items and objects that we will use later on to track completion of this project. So now the consumer of this document will be able to see everything that has gone into the building and the definition and the requirements elicitation of everything that it takes to deliver this particular epic. So documents feed very nicely into this program as well. Now, as I build these items and make traceability, I'd like to see the impact of this particular portfolio epic downward. And so on the left-hand side, I could easily click on a link that is now going to show me this particular program epic and all of the work items, all the items underneath it, and all the different projects that implement that. So I'll be able to see not just the epic, but the capabilities. I'll be able to see the planned features in different program groups, and then ultimately the user stories and tasks that go into that completion. So this kind of traceability becomes very important to look at the information at the top level all the way downward. Now this is still just the single portfolio. In fact, if we open up my project selector in Polarion, we'll be able to see how we can descend into other projects. And so I can also look at the dashboards and information of core products. And this allows me to look at the program level and look at program increments. And maybe we would choose to actually examine a program increment to see what's going on for the 2016. Now, granted, we're sort of frozen in time, but what's the current state of this particular set of core products? And we can see the number of user stories which are planned, how many are done, how many should be done by right now. We'll see some statistics, as well as being able to take access and make changes directly to the plan board for this particular program. And we'll be able to see the specific increments, the program increments, or the iterations tied to these particular items. So all of this dashboard information is available to the stakeholder here, can be exported to PDF, or become part of any meetings without having to look at the hallway boards. So this is also critical to be able to look at core product epic traceability downward. So now I'm not looking at the entire portfolio, but I'm inside my core products project, and I'm looking at the traceability just of these epics to the particular features that are implementing that epic. And so teams now can then contribute to the delivery of this. And the same type of information is fed up into the program epic that we saw fed into the portfolio epic. So that builds portfolio and program level information in Polarion to address delivery on the Agile release train. Now, as we move forward, it's important to note that Polarion is I'll call it process neutral, and it really is designed to model your process. From the practical implementation and field experience that I've developed and I've had personally, I don't ever feel like there's only one safe solution, but rather it's an adaptive model that needs to be ingested by a company and made to fit that company's choice to be able to deliver. And you might not be ready for SAFe initially. You might need to focus on more of a mixed methodology where you're combining Agile with current practice, which could be somewhere between waterfall or V model, and perhaps it's more of a lean project. And maybe instead of a Scrum, you're dealing mostly with Kanban execution. These are all abilities that Polarion can pick up and allow you to begin with pieces of SAFe and pieces of Agile only and put them together in a way that makes sense for your organization now and provide you a path for the future. And all of that can still be fundamentally based on some of these core notions of Polarion documents, tracing from high level to low level documentation that link specific work items or records in Polarion to be able to visualize both the product in detail as well as the work that's going to be done to deliver that project. So with that, I'm going to bring in a second demonstration scenario that focuses more on this team level approach. And this is what's going to let somebody begin right now to pick up Polarion and start with Agile execution and delivery to get ready for that recommendation to move into this SAFe infrastructure. Now, we've seen a little bit of this already. I'm not going to look at portfolio or program level projects, but rather I would focus on the team level. And so inside this structure of SAFe, we have portfolio and program release trains, and then we have team execution and Agile-based iterations. So if I open up or look at the team, now I see a team level dashboard. It's going to help me see how my team is really contributing actively to the overall business delivery, as well as giving me key benchmarks on what things are in progress, what user stories have been verified as done. And so again, I can immediately begin to react to information as it exists now, and perhaps also be able to create items on the fly. I might also choose to make commentation to say, you know, maybe we need to revisit this user story. I observed a defect, and we need to do something else. Oftentimes, this kind of collaboration is the beginning of being able to now have the work of David Merrill as a contributor really start to push some of the changes that happen in the future. So maybe I'll choose to also implement a particular defect. And I was not able to access a So I can have observed defects. I can also have defects which are created as the failure of ongoing testing. Now this defect becomes actionable, and it will have visibility into the association at the program, feature, and epic level. So we want to be able to collaborate immediately. Well, beyond this notion of organizing user stories and creating defects and commenting, we also have the work that happens in the actual execution of a sprint. So here we have another view that shows me a particular sprint iteration. And some people will call them iterations and some people will call them sprints. I sort of use the two interchangeably. But inside this time box, I have a set amount of time with a set number of user stories, which have been assigned story points. So as I move down here, you can see that I have 31 story points still to do. I have a burn down chart, which if you appreciate the fact that we've frozen this project in time, if I were working on it actively, I would know that I'm not tracking well to finish this sprint on time. And I can move down and start to see why I might not be doing that. And one reason might be that this particular user story, which has 6 story points, still has an item in progress. And so from here, I can choose to look at this particular task, and maybe it would be to change the assignee. And so I'll assign it to Steve Developer. And maybe I'll also record how much time it would take him to complete that. Now it's been reassigned, and we have our sprint meeting, and in preparation for the stand-up meeting, Steve Developer says, yeah, I finished this. So now he can drag that to mark as done, and then declare that this particular task within the user story is complete. And this begins now to let the Scrum Master say, all right, well, with all of this work, we can now say that this user story is similar complete. So we'll mark this as implemented, and be able to make sure that we track all of the necessary information to mark this in our own definition of done, and be able to return that status back to one of the higher level program epics, and ultimately back to the portfolio epic of the SAFe infrastructure. And so I hope you get a sense, and I've just touched scratched the surfaces of a few topics of how much information can be planned at the high level, delivered and described at the middle level, and then executed by the teams that are actually getting all of the implementation work done. I'm going to pause for just a second and check and see if there's any questions. I would certainly put out an invitation to be able to ask any question in the questions panel. I will be pausing in just a minute to address some of those questions. But what I'll do now is return back to sort of summarize some of the concepts that we've talked about so far. So we looked at the collaboration of different teams. We started to see how we can build Polarion into that strategy. And this is actually one of my favorite concepts, and that is with Polarion, and especially with the concept of SAFe. Even though SAFe is built on Agile, it's really not just about the user story. Agile in its initial implementation and to a Scrum Master, sometimes everything was about the user story points, and executing that in a sprint and getting it done and having usable software to show to somebody. But in product delivery, it's not really just about the user story, because someone has to determine who's going to pay for all that work. And someone has to look at the relative business risk or in a security vulnerability of the software. The releases have to be planned and calendared and organized with marketing departments. If I'm in financial services, I'm going to have fairly strict business processes such as SOX or GXP that need to be followed in all of this. And this is something that we at Siemens and Corbinsoft have learned from our customers who are in very carefully regulated spaces, that you can achieve the freedoms of Agile and still address the needs of regulatory and quality management. But it takes the entire picture. And so system requirements need to be there. Whatever quality systems are followed need to be part of this. And they all feed into and contribute from the overall software development lifecycle. So Polarion really isn't an Agile tool. I don't propose it to be an Agile tool. I don't propose it to be a requirements management tool at all. Polarion is all about releasing your products and services, whatever products they might be, and however you might do that. That is really what Polarion is all about. And for me, if you can't tell from my voice, that's what makes my job fun, is understanding this and help bringing this to the kind of companies that need this to be able to get the kind of performance advantage that we just talked about, that has been recommended from the Gartner group. So how do I build this together for you? What happens beyond this discussion here? What happens after this demonstration? I would challenge you to start collaborating now. Stop working as individual teams and open up to the kind of safe structure that will allow you to bring product delivery benefit to the entire enterprise. And that enables teams to talk to one another. Instead of being project focused, they can now be product focused and enterprise focused. Now, I haven't talked about it, but it's critical that teams already using Jira or TFS or GitHub can tie into this collaboration network right away. And with Polarion, that's absolutely possible. There's certainly feature parity for all of those tools, but if you have teams already productive with other agile tools, they can feed into the same safe structure that we looked at today with out-of-box connectors and integrations to those products. There is also, of course, a very rich SDK behind the scenes. So oftentimes the same software developers that are writing your software can now reach in and use Polarion to improve how Polarion models your process. And that's something that we at Corbinsoft are very much involved with, both training and assisting customers to get to that level of their own process integration. And of course, what we want to do for sure is we want to be able to collaborate with all of your external stakeholders. And that means from software developers to business analysts to directors, vice presidents, and C-level executives. We want to be able to bring Polarion data, bring that single source of master truth to everybody in the conditional view that they need to. We want to propose to you that Polarion really is a very good bridge to get to SAFe. And we can get these agile teams really increasing their effectiveness and become more business-minded in their thinking. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for your participation today. I invite you to reach out and talk to us, to be able to send us an email and open up a dialogue. I do have a couple of questions which I'm going to try to get at. I'm having some difficulty viewing it in my window here. Give me just 1 second, and I'll pause and address some of those questions. Yeah, so unfortunately, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty accessing. Oh, here we go. Okay, I've opened it up now. So we do have several questions that have come in from attendees today. And what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and try to manually answer them. I know we're kind of coming up to the top of our hour. So I certainly encourage you to stick around to hear these questions, but if you feel like you want to drop off, you certainly may. This webinar has been recorded and will be available at corbinsoft.com, and you can replay it later. You'll also receive an email from GoToWebinar about that recording. If you'd like to talk to us about taking a deeper dive into one of the demonstrations or have more of the discovery conversation to see if Polarion or SAFe might be right for your organization right now, and if it's a good time for your organization, we'd very much like to be part of that aspect of your journey if we can. Additionally, I would recommend that you go to polarion.com/SAFe. You can see more about the SAFe template that you've seen today, and you can also go online for an online evaluation of some of the core Agile functions that we saw today as well. So with that, I'll tackle a couple of the questions. So one question is, in fact, the first question is, how long would it take to implement Polarion SAFe? And do we have to customize the template, or can we use it off the shelf as is? That's a pretty nuanced question. I don't know that I can answer it reliably for everybody because every customer has their own cadence and their own readiness to adopt SAFe. The training alone might be most of the work to make sure that the eventual Polarion stakeholders really understand what they're going to be looking at. Some people need to understand what a portfolio epic is, even as a term. Or maybe we'll need to do the second thing, which is change that and not call it a portfolio epic, but call it something that is consumable to your stakeholders. So the answer to this question is you could begin today and download the SAFe template exactly as you saw me show it to you now, and begin with your own information. It won't require any customization to alter it or get it ready. It's something that you can purchase from Siemens or from Corbinsoft directly, and it can be ready for your use very quickly. However, oftentimes there is some customization. So practically speaking, I've seen Polarion implementations range from 1 to 2 weeks all the way to 6 to 9 months. And it can even go beyond that if you phase in your adoption of SAFe. So it's an excellent question, but unfortunately probably needs to be coupled with one of those discovery sessions I talked about where, we or colleagues at Siemens ask more detailed information about exactly where you're coming from. Okay, another question. Do the virtual boards require additional plugins? No, there are plugins, or rather, I should say, as part of the SAFe template, it comes with all of the add-ons to Polarion that are required to be able to see everything that you saw today. Some of those capabilities are built right into the core product, but in a strict adoption of the SAFe 4.6 architecture, there have been some additions made to really bring some of the particulars of those concepts into Polarion. Very good question. Okay, another question that comes up frequently and is kind of near and dear to my heart, I should say, is can different stakeholders have different views? And so specifically the question is that executives and developers shouldn't be able to see the same information. And that's absolutely true. Sometimes this kind of collaboration becomes challenging because they don't want people to see detailed information, or rather the developers are, if anytime a developer or a tester is afraid to put in frank comments because someone might see it and draw some concern, that's an issue. So inside Polarion, in things that we haven't seen yet today, there are capabilities to be able to have different views for different roles. So an executive could come in and not necessarily have rights to see certain fields or certain dashboards that are consumable to software developers. And we can certainly control role-based access so that a software developer who's working in a team alpha can't go into the program portfolio projects and make changes there unless they're specifically given access. So we can definitely very finely tune what someone sees and what they can change to match that group of stakeholders. I also have a notion from a request from my colleague Arena Sondine to include her email. So I will include that in the replay, but I'll also chat to everybody what her contact information is. So let me paste that and send that out. So I'm sending out Arena Sondine's email address. She's very willing to entertain any of your questions as well. And I will promise that any question you send to me or to Corbinsoft, we'll make sure that we share with our Siemens partners as well. Thanks a lot for that, Arena, and I'll take care of that for the future replay. Let's see. Okay, and then what I'll do is I'm going to close with there's a final question, which I think is a good one, and it's more specific to how Agile works in general with Polarion, just to be able to compare it to different tools you might have seen, and that it's a request to show an example of creating a new user story and assigning it to an Agile iteration or to a Scrum. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and go through that very brief example. It'll probably take me a couple of minutes. It'll take us a little bit over our allotted time, but at the end of that, I'll go ahead and close the recording. Again, with my thanks for everybody who has attended today. Okay, so let me shut down these other views. I'm going to bring back Polarion. Now, you might also take notice that it's regular practice for me to have Polarion always open, to seamlessly move it into my coding when I do software development, or if I'm managing some of my team's tasks, I'll bring our sprint and our action items up. It probably shouldn't surprise you that whenever Corbinsoft implements Polarion with a customer, we use Polarion to manage the events and the portfolio of implementing Polarion with that customer. And that's a really great way to take advantage of learning Polarion while we actually build out that SAFe structure for customers. So, but the question was, that we've seen user stories. I showed how we could move back and forth between an iteration and a user story, but the real question was, how do we create new ones? And there's several ways of doing that. But one of the things I thought we could start with is coming here to say, all right, I can view some number of user stories. You can see I have 25 user story points to complete. I have completed one. That's why we retired some just a moment ago. But maybe I'd look through here and I'm going to allow for a spike to happen here because I'm going to introduce a new user story in the middle of the sprint. Now, sometimes Scrum Masters would say, no, that absolutely does not happen. We won't do that. It always has to be a user story for the next sprint. But just as an exercise, let's show that Polarion as a product allows that to happen. So over here on the right-hand side, there's a plus sign, a little link here to say, let's go add some user stories to this plan. And now I can contextually query, let's look specifically for only user stories which haven't been resolved. So I have 10 to choose from. And I might see, you know what, I don't have the user story that I want. I need to create a new one. So up here, I'll go ahead and click this button. I'll create a new user story. And it will be, as a user, I want to be able to create a user story within a sprint time box. All right. And so every work item gets a work item ID. That work item ID is that direct key to identify it. It also can have the ability to have very detailed custom fields. So it's very easy to extend the idea of a user story to hold a lot more than just a definition of the story point. I might have some directions on how we'll get it done. And it might also be waiting to play sprint poker. So we'll save this and imagine now we're in the middle of a stand-up and someone says, well, we need to accept this into the sprint. So I'm going to perform a workflow function to quickly accept. I'm going to save it, and guess what? I can't because I have to estimate story points. So now we might all play sprint poker, and it turns out that we feel like this is a simple one, so we'll add this as a 3 story point user story. And then if I want to be able to view this up above, at any time I do a query, I can even order it based on IDs. We'll be able to see all of our user stories show right up here. And so here at the top, you can see EL217. That's the one I just created. And it is, as a user, I want to be able to create a user story in the sprint time box. So over here on the right, I have my planning, and here I have my user story, and I can just drop that user story right in and save it. And now I have added that number of story points to the iteration. And now that it's been added into that particular plan, maybe this would be a good time for someone to come and say, all right, we're going to have an implementing coding task. And so we'll say someone has to code it. Maybe we would choose to say, in addition to coding task, I'm going to have a test-driven task. So we're going to have testing tasks. And maybe the final thing I might do as part of this is make sure that I'm documenting. So we'll have documentation. And again, this is one way where the tasks to develop a user story can end up creating the tests that are going to verify requirements and features that feed back up into the system. Meanwhile, I have very clear traceability into this particular user story and how it's being done. And perhaps we would want to tie into a defect that already exists. So I don't always have to create something new. I might actually go looking for a defect and see how can I find this user story as having part of its implementation somebody completing a task, and so I can start querying for not a user story or an epic, but maybe I'll select in here and say we want to look for an issue or a defect that might already exist in the project, where I can look anywhere inside other projects within the repository. And if I'll just sort of grab one as an example, if I pick that particular defect and save it, now I have to pick the right one. Now I'll have the appropriate link between this user story, tasks, and any defects that are going to be addressed by that user story. And if I go back into, I come back into my iteration, we can see that it's gone up. It's gone up from 25 to 28. And if I come down to my sprint board, you can see as a user, I want to be able to create a user story within a sprint time box. And maybe we can start by saying, well, we're starting the progress on coding. And then it's going to remind me as a user, whenever I set a task in progress, I have to make sure I'm assigning it to the right person. So it doesn't let me get off the hook for having to complete the fact that Steve developer is going to be working on it. Maybe I'll even estimate that I think he's going to take 4 hours. And if I do that level of detailed assignment, all that information will roll up to the user story, to the program increment, to the program epic and feature, and to the portfolio epic. That's how all of this sprint level work will contribute back to the type of dashboards that those executives might want to see when they find out how are we doing delivering our definition of done. So I can tell by my rambling here that I've gone way over time. I want to again thank everybody for attending today, and please feel free to follow up with any specific technical or business or procedural question. We'd very much like to hear from you. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to having you join again in a future Corbinsoft webinar present series. Thank you.